If your LG dryer is noisy, let's look at some common culprits that could take your dryer from a peaceful hum to a noisy nightmare. Since we need to take the dryer apart to check quite a few things, make sure to unplug the dryer before taking anything apart. Let's first remove the 3 screws at the bottom of this metal bracket, and once you have these 3 screws removed, you can remove the top panel to the dryer, exposing the drum and the housing. Depending on your LG dryer, there could be 2 screws on the panel behind this metal bracket that you're going to need to remove as shown. However, on this model, it has a steam dry system with this drawer here, which is removable by taking out the water tray, then pulling up on a hidden tab at the bottom of the plastic housing, which allows us to remove this tray. Now you want to unplug all the wires that go from the control interface to the main electronic board at the back of the dryer. On this specific model, there are 3 wire harnesses that need disconnected, 2 on the left side of the trunk and then 1 on the right. Next, there are 2 Phillips head screws that need removed from this model in the steam tray on the very front of it. Most models again would have had those 2 screws behind the interface panel on the metal bracket, keep it in place, but when these 2 screws are removed from the panel, you can pull up on the top of the dryer of the interface and roll it away from the dryer bulkhead housing. On models that do not have this style plastic tray, I've found that you may have to pull extra hard to dislodge the interface from the metal bulkhead, as there are like little retention tabs that hold it on. Once it is off, fully move it to the side away from the dryer. There are 2 wire harnesses that the interface was hiding. One is for the door switch, which is the white one, and then the other is for a light, which is this red harness here. And you want to unplug these and move the wires away from the bulkhead, typically to the rear of the dryer. On this model LG dryer, there are 2 screws on the top of the door that need removed, and then you're going to see another 4 screws inside the door, 1 in each corner, that need removed. But you can see on this style dryer, this exact use dryer that I got, some of the screws are missing. So yours model could vary slightly a little bit, but remove all 6 screws, and then to remove the door cover, you're going to slide the top of the door housing forward and then lift up to take it off the metal feet that are at the bottom of the dryer. Now we want to remove the metal plate that held the interface in place. There are 4 screws on this specific model. There are 2 on each side of the top of the dryer, just behind the panel, and then there's 1 on the front left and 1 on the front right that need removed. But on this model, due to the steam portion, there are 2 crossbars that hold the circuit board in place that have an extra single screw that need removed as well. Once you remove all these screws, take the plate off of the dryer. Since this is such a large LG dryer, we have to remove the steam injection system as well as the control board before we can easily take the drum out. There are 2 screws holding the control board in place, and then a ground screw going from the steam system to the crossbar, and then 2 screws on the back of each crossbar holding them in place at the very back of the dryer. And I'm going through slowly removing each of these pieces and then detaching a rubber hose going to the steam system from the dryer itself. And then I want to remove the steam system entirely itself. That system is held in on the left side of the dryer housing with some plastic arms that slot into the metal. Slide these towards the rear of the unit and the whole housing can be taken out in one easy piece. This was quite a bit of screws, but really easy actually to do. Now at this point, you could unplug all the wires and hoses to totally remove the systems and put them to the side, but professionals are just going to move them away from the work that's being done on the dryer. So I've just flipped them out to the outside of the dryer away from view, but they're still actually attached with the wires. There's plenty of strain relief. Now there are 4 Phillips head screws holding the bulkhead in place, 1 on each corner of the bulkhead, and then there's 1 screw at the very bottom of the blower housing that needs removed to take the entire bulkhead off. Once you have these 5 screws removed, now you want to unclip the moisture sensor in the lower right corner of the dryer. I found out this was already unplugged before I even touched the dryer, and this was actually, I think, one of the problems I had with this dryer that wasn't allowing the dryer to run in the first place. Make sure that that moisture sensor is unclipped, and then you're going to deal with the 5 screws. Once you have all the screws out, you can lift up on the dryer bulkhead to dislodge it from these little tabs holding it in place. Then you're going to remove it from the drum. This will cause the drum to fall on the blower housing. Once you have that done, you're going to get down on your knees and insert your hands into the area between the drum and blower housing and feel around for the idler pulley. To remove the belt from the pulley system here, you're going to push the idler pulley and then remove the belt from the motor spindle and then the entire belt should release, allowing you to take the drum out. Once you have the belt off of the motor mount and idler system, you can use the belt to lift up on the drum and then move the drum out of the dryer. You can now inspect the entire drum of the dryer, anything for visually damaged or anything that's off. When it comes to these roller wheels, they should be able to spin freely and have no areas that are damaged or have flat spots that look like something has worn into the rubber. If you see any sort or any kind of damage, these rollers need replaced, and we're going to do that a little bit later in this video. Another area to look at is the idler pulley, which is just behind the motor assembly. The pulley should be able to freely rotate and have no notches, flat spots, worn areas, or any sort of damage. If you see any damage and you cannot move it freely, then the entire assembly needs to be replaced. At the front of the dryer, the blower wheel could have an obstruction in it. You should be able to rotate the blower wheel freely and have no noise or very little noise when it moves. If it binds up or makes a noise, you can always remove the screws on the front of the assembly and clean the housing out, but we did not have any issues with this particular dryer. Another area that could be related to this is on the bulkhead underneath the filter, and it could feed junk into the blower that could be trapped, but in the case of this dryer, all these things were fine. Another consideration is the rear bulkhead on the dryer itself. This area could be damaged or cut and worn down by the drum's felt being torn apart, causing potential metal on metal contact. If you see any damage to the drum or the bulkhead, you need to replace the felt on the drum or the drum itself, but that's very unlikely for an LG dryer, as well as the bulkhead could need replaced, but that is a very expensive fix too. Next, let's learn to replace the roller wheels on the bulkhead. This is really common on this type of unit. There are a few ways to do this repair, and in this particular video, we're going to take your screwdriver and remove approximately 9 screws from the back of the dryer. There are 8 screws on the top and sides, and then one last screw near the very bottom of the housing. Next, you want to make sure to remove the heating element from the dryer. To do this, you want to remove the wires that are going to the element from the wire trunk. Then you're going to take a Phillips head screwdriver or a drill gun in our case and remove the 2 screws holding the heating element in place. You're going to pivot the element up from the front and then out of the housing that's attached to the bulkhead in the rear. Now, if your LG dryer has a tubing for steam, there may be hoses that you have to remove from your unit. In our case, we had to do that before we removed the bulkhead, but you may not need to do that on your unit. Finally, once you have everything removed, the screws, the tubing, and everything else, you're going to gently lift up on the bulkhead to pull it out of its housing, and now it's totally separated from the dryer. You want to take a 14mm wrench and then a 10mm socket set to take off the roller wheel shaft. I have found that practically all other videos that deal with these rollers gloss over how easy it is to remove these shafts, but I always find that's not the case. I'm using my socket wrench as well as a hollow metal tube as an extension to give more leverage to remove the roller wheel. One thing to watch out for when you're doing this is the metal on the bulkhead at the very corners. It's very thin, and you could cut yourself while trying to remove these roller wheels if you're not careful. I am wearing long sleeves to take care of this. You could also consider wearing gloves, but I had no issues here in terms of not getting cut. With enough force, you're going to eventually break the grip of the shaft and the nut that's behind the bulkhead. You'll then be able to unscrew the roller wheel assembly. In this video, I'm using ERP roller wheels, and generally if one wheel is bad that you found damaged, you want to replace all of them so they're all at a matching age and brand new condition. This is a very high-end DLEX 8000V dryer, and it has 3 wheels on the rear bulkhead and 3 on the front bulkhead that I'm going to replace on and off camera, but most LG dryers only have 2 on the rear and 2 on the front. To install the new roller wheel, you're simply going to put the nut on the rear of the bulkhead, and then you're going to use your ratchet to screw the shaft into the nut and put it on really tight. It's much easier to put this assembly back on than it is taking it off. Again, you're going to replace all 3 of them in any order you choose to on this unit. Make sure to replace those wheels on the front of the bulkhead. I'm going to do that off the screen, but you generally want that totally matched set again, and many times these kits will come in a set of 2 or 4 or 6 to do this, and I have a link to the whole kit, including the idler, pulley, and belt for one price in the description. Once you have the wheels replaced, you're going to want to reinstall the bulkhead on the rear of the dryer. There are two very small slots that the bulkhead will rest on, and once you rest the bulkhead on these slots, you're going to begin to reattach the steam hose to the bulkhead if your dryer has one. Then you're going to reinstall the 9 screws on the bulkhead. You're going to reinstall the heating element on the housing, making sure to put the 2 Phillips head screws in to make sure that the housing does not move. And now you have all the rollers reinstalled. One thing to note is on some style of LG dryers, the bulkhead has a gap to where you do not have to remove it, and you can simply insert your wrench and socket set to remove and replace the roller wheels without taking the bulkhead off. On this particular unit, there was no real gap to do this easy, and with my fat body inside the dryer, you're not going to be able to see that video, so we just kind of skipped it and went the longer but easier way to document. Now let's replace the idler pulley. It's in good shape, but if you need to remove it because of damage, you're going to use your 10mm socket wrench to remove the single bolt that holds the pulley assembly on place. Once you have the pulley removed, there is a small slot on the motor assembly that your pulley slots into, as well as slots for the idler spring. I usually place the idler spring in the housing first and then put the idler in place on the slot, as this is easier to do than install the pulley than the spring later. Once you have the idler in place, you're going to take your 10mm socket wrench and tighten the bolt up. Make sure that the bolt is not too tight so that the idler pulley can move freely, but the bolt does not move itself. These are all the common culprits of your LG dryer making noise. Other unlikely considerations could be that the motor is making noise when it operates. When you spin the blower housing, you would hear that. Another possible consideration is that the drum is no longer perfectly round. A failed roller could have misshapen the entire drum over time, and in that unfortunate situation, you would need to replace the entire drum, or you're going to have to live with whatever thumping noise has begun to form. Now that we've tested all the basic, easy components in the LG dryer, let's go ahead and put it back together after all of our work. First, you want to take the dryer drum and put it back into the dryer with the belt attached. Now, a lot of times the drum will not be slotted properly, and you need to move the drum to make sure it slots in between the bulkhead and the roller wheel assemblies. Make sure the drum can turn smoothly before you do anything else. Next, you're going to put your arms back in between the blower housing and thread the belt onto the idler pulley. This is how I typically put it on, by threading it on the motor pulley first and then moving onto the idler pulley to give the tension to the belt. You'll have to feel around to do most of this, sadly, and it's not easy. If the idler is put on correctly, you should be able to turn the drum on the rollers and the bulkhead, resulting in the belt spinning the motor, idler, and blower fan. If all of these things rotate without any major noise or issues, you know that you've installed the drum properly and you can go on to the next set of installation steps. You also want to make sure the belt is installed to the same marker on the top of the drum. You can see its imprint on the dryer at the top. Now you want to put the front bulkhead on. There are 4 small fingers that rest on the dryer frame that you need to slot the bulkhead onto. You also need to make sure that the front of the drum rests in between the rollers and bulkhead frame, just like the rear. I usually find the easiest way to get it into place is slowly rolling the drum around while I gently push the bulkhead towards the drum. Make sure that you also reattach and reconnect the moisture sensor in the lower right corner, unlike the person that owned this dryer before we got it at our used appliance store. You're then going to go ahead and reattach the 4 Phillips head screws onto the bulkhead to secure it to the dryer frame. And again, on this unique dryer, I'm going to go ahead and put the crossbars back into place and then loosely screw the 2 screws back into the rear of the crossbars, which you can't see too well. Once that's done, the top of the metal bracket that holds the interface is going to go on. There are 2 small metal slots that keep this bracket and slot it into place, and you can't see these very well on camera. Once that's in place, you have 4 screws to reinsert, and then I have to reinsert the crossbars back into the metal bracket. Now I have to put the steam system housing back into place. I mainly have to focus on slotting the housing into place on the sidewall of the dryer and then push it forward to lock into place. Once I have that done, I can route the control board back into place and then insert the steam hose from the dryer into the steam housing system. I screwed up and had to flip the control board around a few times to make sure it gets in the right position, but everything fits into place, and I used the earlier parts of my video just to make sure I referenced the proper positions and matched them up. Make sure you reinsert all the screws as needed, and that the grounding strap is the correct slot. Once you have all that done, make sure the wire harnesses go to the front of the dryer and are routed through the metal bracket properly. The light switch harness needs to be reattached at this point, and then now you're going to take that giant front cover of the door with the dryer and reattach it. It rests on two huge fingers at the very bottom of the dryer and it slots in. Then you're going to pivot and rock the entire assembly towards the dryer. Make sure before you start screwing things in that the door switch harness is reinstalled, and then you're going to slowly reinsert the 6 Phillips head screws that hold the entire front of the door onto the bulkhead, 2 at the top of the cover into the bracket, and then 4 around the door if they fit, which one of these was so damaged from the previous owner I couldn't reinsert it. We are almost done putting the unit back together. Now you will carefully reseat the dryer interface into the metal bracket, press it in, and then you're going to route the 3 wire harnesses through the bracket to make sure that they attach to the harnesses correctly at the rear of the dryer. In the case of this dryer, I had to move the control board forward just a little bit so there was enough room for the wires to attach, and that was a mistake that I made during the video. Once you have it at the right depth, reattach these 3 wire harnesses. At this point, reinsert the screws into the control interface to make sure it's fully attached to the metal bracket. Again, because of the steam settings, the 2 on the left are where I needed attached to this dryer, but in most cases, they're behind the bracket on the left and right side. At this point, you can test the dryer to make sure it works, even though the steam tray is not inserted and the top of the dryer is not on either. This way you can do some initial testing, and in fact, this dryer has been put back correctly. Everything, as you can see, is fully working. And I hope that this video helped you guys. If you have any questions, make sure to comment, like, and subscribe. And now the roller kit should be on the screen if you want to click and shop. It'll help out the channel if you buy it from us. Have a great day.